Hi everyone. Yesterday, RFSU Västerås held a gathering to honor the memory of our activist Eva-Marree, who was murdered last week. I wish I had been there, but there was a lot of us who were there, not only from Västerås but also from neighboring cities. Our national leader, Kristina Ljungros, was among the people who attended. It was said that it was a very good event. For those of us who couldn't come to Västerås, we had a moment of silence. Here in Gothenburg, we gathered in RFSU's place for the moment of silence. Well, around the world, there has been protests against the Swedish model held around the same time. I don't know if it's that very same moment, 4:30, or if it was different times, but it was all the same day. I read an article about this. I'll link it in the low bar, although it is in Swedish. It describes how demonstrations were held outside the Swedish embassies in, among other places, New York, Sydney, Berlin, and Paris. It also interviews a man called Patrik Cederschiöld, who is introduced as national coordinator for the government struggle against prostitution. And he had two things to say in the interview, rather disturbing ones actually. One is that he disregards the criticism of threats against sex workers, that it's an unsafe business to be in. In other words, he blames the victims. He claims that when a sex worker gets murdered, it's because she's a sex worker, not because people have bigotry against sex work and sex workers. In this particular case, as you might remember from my earlier videos, she was visiting social services to meet her son there. The guy who murdered her did so at a social service facility. And this guy says that, oh, it's an unsafe place to be a sex worker. Okay, thank you, Patrik Cederschiöld. I will remember this interview. Very interesting, I must say. I guess the social worker who also got stabbed also had it coming, or something like that. What the hell? And the other thing is just one big fallacy. He used the old tired argument that people like Eva-Marree cannot represent sex workers because they are privileged. He doesn't say this, he just alludes to this general discourse that I'm talking about now. This idea that on the one hand we can dismiss them as being oppressed and being crazy in the sense that they don't understand that they are being oppressed, and at the other hand, if they do eventually convince us that they are not oppressed except by the government, then we can dismiss them on that basis, that okay, you are not oppressed, but then you're privileged and therefore we can dismiss you. Well, what it does say in line with this discourse is that most sex workers, or prostitutes as he preferred to call them, that he have met, they are not like her, they need help, and so on. And seriously, what kind of sex workers do he meet in his line of work? I've talked about this basic phenomenon before, this representation bias, where, okay, we have people who meet those who are convicted of crimes or are in psychiatric care, and from this group we take those who are, for example, sex workers, homosexuals, left-handed, or people who sometimes masturbate, or whatever. And then we just assume that these are representative for the group as a whole. And based on this data, the Swedish government says that all sex workers have horrible lives and their psyches are damaged, etc. The same thing was once upon a time said about homosexuals. That wasn't even long ago. Onanists, people who sometimes masturbate, it was also said about them, but that was 100 years ago. The only persons they knew about who openly masturbated was people in psychiatric care, and they draw the conclusion that all masturbators are insane. The government is still doing this, but to sex workers. And now Patrik Cederschiöld is making this argument, figuratively speaking, on top of the corpse of a murdered sex worker and activist and parent. Well, the same old arguments just keeps going, but they shouldn't remain uncountered anymore. We need to challenge this destructive discourse. And of course, Patrik Cederschiöld is simply doing his job. He is giving the message that he's getting paid to give. So, no ill will against him as a person, but the message he spreads, it's dismissive against people who gets murdered. Not only activists like Eva-Marree that people knew about and therefore care about, but also those people we don't get to know about. Don't blame the victim. When a sex worker gets murdered by an angry ex-partner or by a client or by some random idiot, it's not because she was a sex worker, it's because that guy did it. It's his fault, not hers. Also, one more thing on this subject. The so-called client who murders a sex worker actually didn't pay her, not in the end, ultimately anyway, and is therefore not really a client. You might think that I'm splitting hairs here, and so did I until a few days ago. I didn't find this argument really compelling, but then I pictured this scenario. Imagine a man entering a shop, and he looks around in the shop and take, for example, a chocolate bar or something like that, and then he goes up to the counter and stretches down into his jacket to pull something out, and of course the staff expects that to be his wallet to pay for the bar of chocolate, but instead he has a gun. He's robbing the place. He's violating the staff. How many of us would say that, oh, this is how the clients of shops behave, and the staff had it coming because they were in a public place and inviting that kind of... I hope you get my point here. So don't blame the victims, and for those of us who are still alive, live long and prosper.